There is so much gear involved in whitewater kayaking, and as a beginner, it can be a little daunting to start. But what gear do you actually need to learn kayaking? What can you buy used, and what do you absolutely need to buy new? Let's break it down. Beginner gear for whitewater kayaking. I've been in this industry a very long time, and I'm here to share with you guys my experience. But always make sure that you check with a manufacturer about the proper use and fit of their equipment. And I highly recommend going to your local retailer to get outfitted and to get whatever gear you need. Getting into kayaking requires the 5 essentials, which are your kayak, paddle, spray skirt, PFD or life vest, and helmet. But there's also other things you need too, like good footwear, earplugs, and the right clothing for the river that you're on and the temperature of the water in the air. I'm going to start by breaking down the essential pieces of equipment, and then I'm going to talk about those add-ons. I'm also going to let you know what gear you really need to buy new and what gear you can get away with buying used. As always, in the paddle sports industry, like any other outdoor industry, you really do get what you pay for, and if you can afford to buy the good thing first, a lot of times you'll save yourself money in the long run. But that doesn't mean kayaking has to be an expensive sport to get into. Now, before I go any further, I like a post-river beer as much as anybody, but what I've found is alcohol is not very good for athletic performance, and sometimes it just doesn't feel well or you have a long drive after the river. So finding a non-alcoholic beer that tastes good has been really hard. But one of the ones that I found that I really liked is by Go Brewing. I've been a member of the beer club with Go Brewing, but I recently started a deal with those guys. So if you would like a discount on your own non-alcoholic beer, I'll put a link in the description below. Let's start with boats. So the thing I look for in a kayak is, number one, fit. Your kayak needs to fit you properly so that you can use it. You should, when you're sitting in a kayak, have 5 points of contact: your feet, your knees, your butt, your hips, and your back. You want to make sure that the kayak feels snug, like it's a part of you, but not tight or uncomfortable. I'm going to do a separate video to break down what I recommend as your first kayak. But in general, what I recommend is a kayak with a little bit of extra volume just to make sure that you feel nice and safe on the river, something with a lower volume stern so that you can learn how to load your stern and work with the river, and a boat with edges. I actually recommend a lot of times for beginners to paddle something like a fairly friendly river running half slice. But if you're more aggressive and you're really excited to be a beginner and you're all about the water and you're athletic and fit, you might want something smaller to steepen your learning curve and to learn kayaking faster. And if you're more timid and you're scared or you're heavier, you need a little extra volume in order to feel comfortable, then I recommend a creek boat. The downside to a creek boat is that it can hinder that learning curve by masking a lot of the mistakes that you make as a beginner. Make sure you check out my buying your first kayak video for more details. All right, let's talk paddles. The thing about whitewater paddles is that they are your connection to the water. And it may sound counterintuitive. You may think, oh, you can just paddle with anything. But the truth is, you're going to be learning a lot of strokes and a lot of concepts as a beginner that involves keeping your paddle in the water. And for that reason, I recommend getting a paddle that fits properly, feels good, and has the right size blade to match your power and experience level. Every manufacturer has their own range of paddle sizes, and if you go to their website, you'll see the right length paddle for your skill level or for your size. Typically, if you're a smaller paddler, you're going to want something that's a shorter paddle, like 194 centimeters. If you're a medium-sized paddler, you're going to want to look at something that's around 197 centimeters. If you're a tall or lanky paddler with longer arms, you might want a 200 centimeter or even a 203 centimeter paddle. That's in general for whitewater. Feather is the difference in blade angle on your paddle. I recommend starting at around 30 degrees. A 30-degree feather allows your paddle to enter the water nice and smoothly with a straight wrist. And when you go to take the next stroke, it lands also with a straight wrist in the position that you need if you're using enough torso. Less than 30 can be better for freestyle kayaking and playboating. 45 degrees can be better for river running and creeking because you're using more torso when you take strokes. My recommendation for beginners though is start around 30 and go from there. See what works best for you. There are two types of shafts that every paddle is going to have. There's a straight shaft or a bent shaft. And a straight shaft, when you go to take a paddle stroke, is going to require your wrist to bend a little bit. Your wrist is not going to be very straight. But a bent shaft allows your wrist to be nice and straight as you take the stroke, and it reduces the amount of torque on your wrist over time. So a bent shaft is better to prevent things like carpal tunnel syndrome and long-term wear and tear injuries, whereas a straight shaft may feel like it provides more direct power. There's a myth that if you use a bent shaft, you're not going to be able to use a straight shaft because it'll feel funny. That's just not true for me. I can grab any paddle and use it, it's fine. What matters to me more is feather. That said, either is totally fine, they're just personal preference. There's three types of paddle blades when you're buying paddles: fiberglass, carbon, and foam core. Fiberglass is a lot more durable and it tends to chip around the edges and splinter a little bit, and it can feel a little sharp, but it's more affordable and they last much longer. They also flex more, which is easier on your wrists. Carbon blades are more stiff, more efficient, and a little bit more expensive. The downside to buying a carbon blade as a beginner though is that they can be harder on your wrists and harder on your body because of that stiffness. Foam core blades are a little bit better. They tend to feel extra floaty when you're taking strokes. They go from stroke to stroke faster, and they're much more expensive, but they're less durable. And in rocky areas or as a beginner, when you're not really sure where to plant a paddle stroke, your foam core blade is probably not going to last as long. For beginners, I usually recommend getting a glass blade that's an appropriate size for their skill level. You need to look for a blade size that matches your size and strength as a paddler. Stronger paddlers can get away with or even need larger blades, but oftentimes smaller blades are better for beginners or for when you're learning how to take proper strokes. At the same time, if you're a larger person or a stronger person, getting too small of a blade can be a problem or a hindrance. So check with a retailer or manufacturer for the best blade size for you. The next essential piece of equipment is a spray skirt. This spray skirt covers the cockpit and keeps all of the water out and makes it much easier to stay in. If you're going to learn how to roll, you're going to need a spray skirt. But there's a lot of different skirts out there, so which one is the right one for a beginner? Which one's the right one for you? There are a lot of different options, but there's two basic ones that you need to be worried about. And that is a bungee skirt or a rand. The bungee skirt uses a bungee cord, essentially, around the cockpit. They can be pretty solid. A rand skirt or rubber rand uses a big piece of rubber that's much more difficult to stretch that goes around the cockpit. Rubber rand is significantly stronger, better, and more dry when it comes to your kayak. Experts prefer rubber rand, and if you're running any sort of big waterfalls or high volume rapids, a rubber rand skirt becomes essential because they stay on the cockpit better. The problem with rubber rands for beginners is they're much harder to use, they're harder to put on, and they're really not necessary. As a beginner, I highly recommend just getting a good bungee skirt because that's going to do the job and last you through your beginner phase in whitewater kayaking. The bungees are much easier to fit on a variety of kayaks, which you need. When you're not used to putting on a spray skirt, it can be quite difficult and challenging. So starting with a bungee just shortens that learning curve and makes kayaking a lot more comfortable to learn. Every spray skirt has two measurements. It has the cockpit size and it has the tunnel size. The tunnel size is the part that goes around your waist that should fit up to around your chest. The big thing you want for the tunnel is for it to be snug and fit. You want it to be tight against your skin, tight against your body, but not so tight that you have trouble breathing. The cockpit size matches the kayak. For most whitewater kayaks, you'll need a size large or extra large cockpit. You can get away with an extra large spray skirt for pretty much any boat. Same with a large. The difference is that if you're gonna paddle more play boats, or if you're a smaller paddler in general, and you're gonna be paddling smaller sized boats, then you'll want a size large spray skirt. If you're a larger paddler, an average paddler, or you're gonna be paddling a bigger boat, then you're gonna need an extra large spray skirt. The large deck is really hard to fit on an extra large cockpit. Helmets. The thing about a good kayaking helmet is that a kayaking helmet should fit nice and snug. It shouldn't move very much front to back or side to side. It's fit really tight, but still comfortable. When you buckle it, it's not gonna come off. The buckle's not gonna go over your chin, but it's also loose enough to be able to move and have a full range of motion. This is a good fitting helmet. It covers my temples, protects my occipital lobe. It's gonna keep me safe. The thing about kayaking though is you never take just one hit. Anytime you're upside down in a kayak, you're gonna get hit by more than one rock. And for that reason, all kayak helmets have multi-impact foam. That multi-impact foam is designed to take hit after hit and still protect your head. The catch is not all helmets are made equal, and in sports like whitewater kayaking, there really is no true governing body that ensures any helmet has to be safe. There's a lot of unsafe helmets out there. For that reason, I recommend you check out a project that was done by Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech tested a whole bunch of helmets and compiled them in a list and scored them based on the amount of protection they provide and their cost. I'm gonna link it in the description below. In addition to open face helmets, they make full face helmets with a guard. I don't really recommend those, but if you've got expensive dental work and you're really wanting to protect yourself, they're okay. The downside to a full face I found is that if you're not careful, they can be a bit of a snag hazard. They can provide a false sense of security or limit some of your perspective on the river and ability to communicate with other people. That said, it's a personal preference. Get what you need to feel safe. Helmets are one of the most vital pieces of safety gear you're gonna need as a kayaker. The helmet needs to be replaced every 3 to 5 years or every major impact. As a beginner, you need a better helmet than anybody else because you're probably gonna be upside down more than anyone else. For that reason, I don't recommend buying a helmet used. Helmets are something you need to buy new. Go ahead and spend the money on it, get a good one, check out those tests by Virginia Tech, and make sure that you're getting a helmet that is going to protect you through all those hits. Pro tip, never throw your helmet in the back of the truck. Don't let it roll around in the car. Protect it with your PFD or spray skirt and keep that helmet nice and strong for you so that all the hits that happen to it happen on the river. The next essential piece of gear is a PFD, a personal flotation device, or life vest. This should be essential for any kind of kayaking that you're doing, not just whitewater kayaking. The lack of PFDs is one of the biggest killers of kayakers every single year, and the reason why most kayakers who drown don't drown in whitewater. But the thing is, in whitewater kayaking, PFDs become exponentially more important. The Coast Guard recently changed its terminology from PFD back to life vest for whitewater kayaking and specific PFDs. And they've recently changed from the types 1 through 5, to performance levels. For whitewater kayaking, we would typically recommend a type 3 or type 5 PFD to have enough buoyancy and the right fit for whitewater. Now, with performance levels, you need a performance level over 70, but my recommendation to make it way less confusing is to buy from a whitewater manufacturer. Those are designed specifically for whitewater kayaking. They're Coast Guard approved, and that's what I would recommend. There are 2 types of whitewater specific PFDs that you're gonna encounter if you go to an outfitter store. The first is a standard PFD, and the second is a rescue PFD. You'll know it's a rescue PFD because it'll have the quick release belt and Loop. The thing about rescue PFDs is that they are really designed for experts, and you need a swiftwater rescue class to know how to use them. I don't recommend starting with a rescue PFD as a beginner kayaker. I do recommend taking a whitewater safety course as soon as you can, and as soon as you feel comfortable, take a swiftwater rescue course. The biggest thing about a PFD is that it needs to fit properly. So when you put on a PFD, it shouldn't be loose. It shouldn't be too tight that you can't breathe. It should be pretty comfortable. And most whitewater specific PFDs come up pretty high. My belly button's right here. And the reason for that is when you're sitting in a boat with a spray skirt on, you don't want your PFD pushing up above your head. And so a properly fit PFD should fit nice and tight, and it's not gonna come off of you. So even if you're floating in the water, the shoulder straps are just going to be resting nicely on your shoulder. They're pretty low profile, which allows for paddling, and they're comfortable. The main thing is make sure that you don't have a lot of loose straps hanging off your PFD or loops, and make sure it's not too loose around the shoulders, because the thing about whitewater is that branches and things like that can snag your PFD. So you want it nice and streamlined against your body. There shouldn't be a whole lot hanging off or draped around. They do make PFDs to fit different body types. And so there are women specific gear as well. Just check with your local retailer to find what fits you best. You know, I never recommend anyone paddle barefoot. You're always having to hike around rapids or get out and scout or help a friend. And if you're barefoot, your feet are just vulnerable to cuts and abrasions, but also you're not gonna be moving very quickly. The first thing people think about when they think about footwear is they think about neoprene booties or sandals. And for most rivers and most kayaking, I actually don't recommend either one. It may seem like booties are the way to go, and in some playboats or freestyle kayaks that are smaller, you may need to. But the problem with booties is they provide no real ankle support, very little foot protection, and honestly, their traction is not very good. All right, the three things that I recommend really thinking about when you're thinking about whitewater footwear is that you need to have traction first and foremost. Traction is probably the most vital thing. They need to drain well, and obviously you're gonna want durability. I'd throw in a fourth thing, and that is that you need to have good support. The shoe needs to fit well, support your ankle, and even have arch support. All of those things are almost impossible to find in modern footwear. But usually we can prioritize the ones that are most important for our needs. For traction, there is nothing better than Stealth Rubber by Adidas 510. They drain really well, they fit really well, and you can have good arch support and even use your own cushions to improve the arch support in the shoes. They're lightweight and they're great. The problem with the Stealth Rubber, even though it is the best traction in the world, you're not gonna find better. They always just fall apart. They just don't last. The shoes that I tend to wear the most when creeking and river running, when I absolutely need solid traction and a solid fit, are the 510 Free Riders. I have no affiliation with these guys, but the reason is because it has the Stealth Rubber sole and the sole is completely sewn on all the way around. You would think that that would solve my problem completely and that they would be perfect, but the material's pretty thick and they tend to become waterlogged, and they just don't, they hold more water than I would like. So they get a little heavier when they're wet, but they really get the job done and they last a long time. They're really strong on durability. Companies like Astral tend to check all of the marks. And so Astral booties tend to have really good traction. They have the sewn on sole, and they can provide good support. They're pretty lightweight and they drain well. You're gonna have to find what works best for you. But the thing is, actual shoes with really good traction are what I recommend for learning how to kayak. And as a beginner, chances are you're gonna be out of your boat more than anybody else. And for that reason, I recommend getting good footwear and making sure that your shoes are nice and tight and provide support so that you don't get hurt while you're learning how to kayak. You also don't want to lose your footwear on the river when you swim. All right, this may come as a shocker as an essential piece of gear, but I would actually list it as one of your essentials, and that's earplugs. The reason I recommend earplugs for kayaking is not to prevent ear infections. The problem with kayaking is that all the water we paddle in is usually 70 degrees or colder. What that means is that our ears are subject to a bone growth condition called exostosis or surfer's ear. Every single kayaker who's exposed to the river water will gradually develop bone growth in their ears that has to be surgically removed. If you want to see more about surfer's ear, I did a whole video on it when I had my surgery. But the way to prevent the problem is just to wear earplugs every single time you kayak. And they make earplugs that you can hear through. And so these are Docs Pro plugs, and I also wear surf ears sometimes. But I've actually been liking the vented Docs Pro plugs the most. They're not that expensive. You can get them on Amazon. I get them leashed. And when you put them in your ear, it's really not a big difference. And you can hear everything just fine. I recommend protecting your ears immediately from the start. Otherwise, you'll find yourself within 10 years having significant bone growth in your ears and potentially looking down the road looking for surgery. As a beginner, you're going to be learning how to roll, which means you might be upside down a lot. You're going to be upside down a lot. And so nose plugs can be a really great thing to wear. The thing about nose plugs is there's a lot of different types and a lot of different shapes, but just a basic pair of something like Smileys or similar is really all you need. There's a debate. Some kayakers say you should never wear nose plugs. Sinus infections are a thing that I struggle with, so you'll see me wearing nose plugs anytime I'm in questionable water. My rule of thumb is that I wear nose plugs anytime I'm in a swimming pool or anytime I'm in water that's a little bit dirty. All right, two little things that every kayaker needs. You need to have a good whistle. The Fox 40 is the only one that does the job, by the way, and a rope. There are different types of throw ropes. There are different lengths of throw ropes. There are different diameters of throw ropes. What I recommend is something that you're just gonna use consistently. And in my region, most of the time, 50 feet is enough. If I'm going to a wider place or a bigger river where I might need to use a throw rope a lot, I'll grab a 75-foot throw rope. If I'm going to a place where I'm gonna use it as an anchor a lot, or if I'm gonna rappel or do something crazy, I'm going to use a very different rope. You don't want to put a carabiner on either end, because you don't want to throw the metal at somebody that you're trying to rescue. Every kayaker needs to have a throw rope, and you need to learn how to use it. One thing that's actually really affordable that I recommend every beginner get for their kayak are flotation bags. Good flotation bags will fill up the volume with air in your kayak, so when you swim, and you will swim frequently, your entire boat isn't filled with water. That decreases the chances of losing your kayak and makes rescue a lot easier and more safe for the people who are helping you. For clothing, you always need to avoid cotton. Cotton's gonna make you cooler every time, it's gonna hold water, and it increases your chance for things like hypothermia. If you wanna know what to wear, I made an entire video about it, what to wear kayaking, especially in the cold. I'll link it in the description below. All right, so now that we've done a rundown over all the gear, the essentials and the not quite essentials, what can you buy used and what do you absolutely need to spend the money on to buy new? Because helmets need to be replaced every 3 to 5 years or every major impact, you really should never buy a helmet used. Go ahead and protect your head. We take some of the biggest hits I've ever had in kayaking. So it's good to make sure that you have the appropriate protection for all those days that you're going to be upside down on the river. I also recommend buying a PFD new. The reason I don't recommend buying a used PFD is that the foam can compress and they gradually lose flotation. What that means is that you should replace your PFD every 5 to 10 years or every 300 days of use. Buying it new means it has adequate flotation, and I can tell you from experience, when your PFD no longer has the flotation you need, swimming up can be a very uphill battle. All right, the next thing I recommend on your priority list is actually a paddle. A paddle is your connection to the water, And having a good paddle that fits right, that's got solid blades, it feels good in your hands, it's gonna improve your learning curve as you learn strokes and concepts. There's nothing wrong with learning in a boat that's a few seasons old or even quite old. In fact, a lot of the older designs are still relevant today. You're likely going to be trading out different kayaks and trying out different boats as you're learning how to paddle. And over time, you'll figure out what you like. And so buying a used kayak is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, even if it's got some good welds and things like that. You can buy a cheap kayak. Buying a spray skirt is the same. You need to make sure that it fits your kayak and fits your waist. But other than that, you can patch holes, and you don't need a solid bomb-proof spray skirt when you're learning how to kayak. What you do need is proper footwear, proper life vest, and a proper helmet. You need the ability to swim safely. You'll also need a way to transport your kayak, so you'll likely also need straps and a kayak rack. These things can be bought over time. There are creative ways to stash your boat in the trunk, and if you drive a truck, even better. But hopefully, this helps you figure out what gear you actually need getting started in kayaking. I recommend going to a paddling school, learning through a club, or getting some really good professional instruction, because that's going to help you exponentially increase your learning curve and make paddling much more faster and more fun to learn. Kayaking is a lot of fun, and making sure that you have the right gear and the right safety gear makes all of the difference. And be sure to go to my website to see what learning opportunities are happening near you. And go ahead and subscribe to my email list. That way you'll get a heads up and you'll be one of the first to know when an opportunity comes up near you. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. I'll see you on the river.